The Fall of Currl, written by Daniel Dreyer. Find me on Facebook as Daniel Pony Rider. This is a work of fiction copyrighted by Daniel Dreyer. When I began constructing an Astra Militarum army, I didn't want them to look standard or Cadian, mostly because some of my friends joked about them being green army men when they were introducing them to newer players. And so I created a custom regiment. Their color scheme would be white, and they would all have gas mask helmeted heads from the miniature line of a game called Pig Iron. They would be one of a handful of planets that has never seen corruption or treachery on their home world. The people of Currl are so paranoid when it comes to corruption that when they deploy, they do so in effectively environment suits. If there's even the slightest breach of this environment suit, a commissar would then kill that soldier. This reputation is what led to the story you're about to hear, where they have such a reputation for purity that they are sent to combat forces of the Chaos Space Marines directly. I wrote this story after doing conversion work on my Astra Militarum army to give them a Chaos look, and I told all of my friends that I was corrupting my own personal Astra Militarum regiment, and everyone seemed to love this idea, and so I wrote this 13-page story, which I am now going to dictate to you. So, enjoy. Thus begins the journal of Sergeant Eric Sava, 1st Platoon, 1st Company, 2nd Battalion, 33rd Regiment of the Currl Regimentum, Lansana Campaign. The following text precedes every one of my journals. Each journal is meant to capture one campaign within which I have served. These writings follow events from my point of view. If my literacy surprises the reader, it may help you to know that I hail from a proud military noble house. While my many siblings serve as officers, I am the only one to have chosen enlistment. We are currently in transit and approximately 5 days away from the Lansana system, and in greater numbers than in any other conflict. Rather than fill these pages with statistics, our deployment can be described as the entire regimentum. That means over 100 million troops, from mechanics to foot soldiers, will wash over and cleanse the Lansana system. We will be joined by no one else. Our regimentum has been trusted to work together and crush the rebellion on Lansana 4, which has likely spread to most of the other planets in the system. Why the Currl Regimentum? We have an implacable record. We have never suffered corruption, never run from a fight, and our planet is as loyal as they come. We are the only regimentum to battle chaos in sealed plastirubber suits. Our filtered gas masks protect our bodies from the stench of corruption. We are the purest regiment, though hardly the largest. This threat in Lansana, we have been told, will probably involve battle against Chaos Space Marines of the Black Legion. We have been chosen not only for our record, but for our purity. We will crush these traitors the same way we did on 4S, and as well as the systems surrounding the Nos Arge Nebula, my 2 prior campaigns. We can't be stopped. It's as simple as that. We have received what is hoped to be our final readiness check. Space travel being the way it is, it cannot be predicted exactly when we will exit the warp. At this stage, we are on vigilant standby. This means that we will drill and maintain arms, but nothing that cannot be dropped immediately. Most of the men are praying. I am eager for this fight. I am keeping in close proximity to my squad, so I can form them instantly and join the platoon a minute later. We are all on edge. Perhaps this is because we have been promised direct combat with Chaos Space Marines. I believe our regimentum has battled them before, but that would have been before my time. And to my knowledge, only one Chaos Space Marine per every 10,000 cultists. This may be our first time against organized Space Marines. We have been drilled appropriately, however. For example, veteran teams have been endlessly drilled on how to leap from a chimera and then instantly blast dummy targets with plasma bolts. This fills me with confidence. The battles ahead will be difficult, as always. Many will die, as always. And in the end, the Currl regimentum will be victorious. Emperor willing, I will live to see that day. Perhaps I should pray as well. Day 0. The general alarm has been activated. Our ship has emerged from the warp. I have already mustered my squad, and we stand in formation within our platoon, within our company. I am not displaying proper decorum as I am writing this when I should be standing at attention. I wanted to capture this moment, however. We are all ready for battle. We all stand tall and proud, with our weapons ready for use. I know now that my doubts yesterday were foolish. We will win, and this will be our greatest victory. Our planet's name will go down in history, and they will study our battles in the Schola Progenium. Time to stow the notebook and draw my heirloom power sword. For the Emperor. Day 1. We have secured a beachhead, finally. When our lander opened, the battle had already been joined by the 3rd and 28th. I watched as a captain formed firing lines, rotating shooters in and out as they pounded away at what our scouts told us was something between 10 and 15,000 traitor guardsmen. They had no artillery, which made it easy for line infantry to advance and push the enemy away from their hardpoints. A steady stream of frag grenades fired from grenade launchers disrupted their formation, and the cowards fled. By the time we secured their fortifications and secured the landing zone, about 6 hours had passed. We certainly didn't kill many of them, but we shifted their formation into CA City, a large manufactorum. We think that they may be fortifying the engineering level, which will make for lots of battles in huge corridors with little cover. Once we shore up our defenses, command will form platoons to make the assault. Having done essentially nothing in the initial battle, I long for action and desire to spill traitor blood. Day 2. Hopeless. We have made little progress. All day I have been commanding squads to move in formation and to open fire on distant enemies with cold steel beneath our feet. Smoke caused by fires resulting from thrown grenades filled the ceiling of the corridors to the extent that we could no longer see it. My squads were shot out from under me. I formed new firing lines, even issued my own orders to the infantry, but the cult's autoguns were relentless. What's more, I had to execute my comrades if a bullet caused a tear in their pressurized suit. All in all, they killed more of us than we did to them, and they can only have reinforced their positions by now. I will probably be moved to another front, as our commander decided that the corridors are wide enough to fit chimerae, and so he has requested hellhounds. That should flush the cults out of engineering. Day 5. CA City is burning. Over the past 3 days, our infantry has been playing a defensive game against the cults of Lansana. holding the fortifications near the drop zones. Meanwhile, nearby armored regiments have been loosing a near-constant bombardment against the southern side of the city. Basilisks, wyverns, manticores, and Leman Russ battle tanks have been leveling entire city blocks. There is still a great deal of CA City standing, but 72 hours of constant shelling has devastated the one region of the city that is not reinforced. Scouts have been busy, and when I questioned one, he let on that our commanders were preparing for a full-scale assault of the city. This made me happy. I was eager to rejoin the fray and destroy those traitors myself. Day 8. The south and east of CA City are ours. With much of the southern sector in ruins, we were able to move large infantry blocks through the rubble and form long formations. We had a lot of success using 3-rank formations, where the first 2 ranks were kitted with las guns and frag grenades, and the 3rd rank carrying grenade launchers. We pounded the Colts back in the long hours of the offensive, and with the cultists busy dealing with our push, a steady stream of Valkyries moved troops into the northern sector. That was not a part of our brief, but I imagine that veterans and Militarum Tempestus scions were waging war behind enemy lines. Just today, we swung our formation like a door, which took a lot of coordination and patience. With our movement, we swept the cultists into the eastern city, which is still largely intact, and we kept the pressure on until they fled the city and continued east, where non-stop Earthshaker shells beat down on the exposed troops. We dealt real damage today in this offensive, and the casualty count on the enemy side was very high. At this moment, we are securing the eastern sector, while reinforcements secure the south. This campaign is going very well for us, and our casualties are actually fairly low. I have overheard officers saying that, at this rate, we will be headed home much more quickly than we had planned. And as I look on the sky, Marauder bombers fade in and out of the smoke, and heavy ordnance is being dropped somewhere to the west. It looks like CA City will be ours soon. Still, I long for the coming battles. I have this unending urge to kill the enemy, and I am sure to do so in the coming weeks. Day 15. We have been going door to door in the eastern side of CA City for about a week now. This is monotonous work, but has not been without its rewards. While the day-to-day action has been unworthy of journal entries, we have managed to discover a great deal many heretics cowering in the residential buildings. I have not been keeping count, but I would estimate that my squad alone has executed roughly 3,000 unarmed inhabitants over the period of the week, some of which I put down with my own power sword. The power field makes the blade slice through the bodies as though there were nothing there, and I've been practicing decapitating and cutting in half at the waist, which was extremely satisfying. Anyway, I am making an entry at this point because we have received new marching orders. They say we are headed north into the mountainous regions. I look forward to facing a more challenging prey. Day 18. I am simply checking in at this point. We have endured forced marching to the north for the past 3 days. We are not receiving enough water considering the entire march has been uphill. I have been doing my part in keeping my squad in line, as well as those around me. I have taken to carrying my power sword at all times to emphasize my authority, which is minimal considering my rank of sergeant. Alas, meal break is at an end. I continue to watch the skies as bombers and Valkyries travel back and forth. Hopefully, there will be an enemy to attack when we get there. Day 20. The siege of Tesfort is at hand. We arrived in the rocky hills to the city's south yesterday afternoon and found a heavily fortified clutch of many thousands of cultists. Craters across the battlefield tell me that those bombers have been softening these cultists up, and I eagerly led my squad in formation with the platoon as our lieutenant plunged us into the thick of it. We took a few mortar hits on the way in, and we were at roughly 2/3 strength when we received the command to take aim and fire. Autoguns cut my men to pieces, and I moved to other squads that had lost their sergeants, screaming for them to advance on the foe. I took a bullet to my pistol arm, and tried not to show that I was in pain. By the time we drove them to retreat, my whole arm was covered in blood. A couple of the guys ripped up some uniforms belonging to the dead and patched me up as best they could. Luckily, we were ordered to stand our ground and await the advancement of our own artillery, so I had the chance to rest. That was yesterday. Today, we continue to hold just south of Tesfort, and while we have been pelting them with mortars, we can finally hear a steady earthshaker bombardment. This will clear the way for our own invasion, and not a minute too soon. My bandages have my left arm immobilized, but I'm otherwise in fighting shape and eager for a little revenge. Day 23. The 33rd was joined by the 8th, 9th, 11th, and the 40th as we formed up and marched massive columns of infantry into the lion's den. We initially passed and crossed over the ruins of many bunkers and bastions, probably all destroyed by our basilisks. The Colts were not far, however. Taking shelter in the rubble ahead of us, they laid down ceaseless gunfire as we advanced through the very wide street. There was almost no cover, so we marched. We got ourselves in the right headspace, and when it was our turn at the front, we let them have it. I commanded rows of men to take a knee and open fire all day long. As men carrying grenade launchers approached, I directed them to stand at various places that gave them cover and a good firing lane. I have no idea how many infantry were ahead of us, but it was likely in the tens of thousands. As I write this, there is a break in the fighting because a column of Lehman Russ battle tanks just rolled ahead of us. Those should be able to break the rubble the Colts are hiding behind and drive them further back. I can hear nothing but the sound of dozens of heavy bolters firing constantly. Well, back to it. I should not be taking the time to write this, as we are continuing to fight our way down the road, and we are currently seeking shelter out of a wall of bodies we have constructed. I must make a record of this, however. Word is coming down the line that we have engaged at least one Chaos Space Marine. Command grabbed a company out of our formation and is moving up the right flank. Supposedly that's where the fallen Marine was sighted. Anyway, back to it. Day 24. We are deadlocked with the Colts as we continue to fight over the main street. The battlefield is filled with ruins from fallen buildings, bodies, craters, and deserted tanks. There is plenty of cover, but the debris makes creating formations difficult. We just called a halt to the las gunfire on the front to give our artillery a chance to reorient and test fire. This does not mean that we are not defending our line, simply that we are not pressing theirs. My back is to a large slab of concrete that managed to end up in the middle of the street, and several other soldiers are here with me. We are catching our breath, checking for injuries, and drinking from our canteens, all of which is made complicated by the environment suits we wear at all times. Sustenance tubes allow us to eat liquefied food and, of course, drink. Anyway, I expect our push to resume within the hour. Day 25. I am taking a break behind a wall. I cannot remember the last time I slept. Our advance is going well, in that we are slowly working our way down the main road. Our casualties are high, but they should be, considering our opposition. No news on the possible appearance of a Chaos Space Marine. There are, however, well over a few thousand cultists here, as I had originally guessed a lifetime ago. There are definitely tens of thousands, and I might even consider adding a zero to that. They are forcing us to pay for every foot we take, because they know that once we have captured the main road, the city will be cut in half. I assume that we have several regiments working their way up the flanks this very moment. I am tired and winded. I can only be expected to kill so many thousands of humans before one becomes winded. I am needed. Day 26. We have successfully captured and fortified the wide road that runs straight through the center of the city. Artillery fire to the east would seem to indicate that, now that we have the center, reinforcements are pressing the eastern side of the city. The cultists are making it difficult for us to hold the road, however. We have been forced to abandon vast stretches due to lack of cover, and have stationed snipers and scouts to monitor those zones. I am within a triangle-shaped clearing surrounded by rubble, trying to keep the men enthusiastic and optimistic. After all, I see no reason to doubt our victory at this point. Many have given their lives, but we are still accomplishing our goals. When Test Fort falls, our job will be much easier. I have no illusions, however. We will definitely be here for the better part of a year, at least. Considering our progress thus far, however, I definitely feel that it's only a matter of time. Day 30. It has been 1 month since the Astra Militarum have arrived in this system, and we have much to show for it. The cults have put up a good fight, but they are now almost entirely in retreat. In the past few days, we have managed to secure several critical points in the city. I am currently overseeing the defense of Monument Square, though we are not currently under attack. Reinforcements are pouring in from the south, and Chimerae are plowing the roads to make way for supplies. We can still hear gunfire to the west, but with our artillery positioned in the innermost part of the main road, we have no problem reaching the enemy with our mortars. Morale is pretty good, and soldiers are jumping to their tasks without the need for encouragement. It is at times like these that I am proud to be a guardsman. Day 32. I finally get a good night's sleep, and I end up having nightmares. I do not remember much, aside from some general idea of being pursued by monsters. I attribute this to the ongoing war. The men around me in Monument Square have been complaining of nightmares as well. This is the physical toll of ongoing combat, and I have seen it before on distant battlefields. Monument Square has become a refueling station for Valkyries, where they stop off before heading further north. Our resupply has largely been large fuel vats, and everything we need to fill the tanks of our vehicles. Food, water, and medical supplies, on the other hand, are dwindling. We are rationing, and I am trying to keep the men busy by rotating posts and giving them work. Because of this, we are able to build quite a lot of makeshift fortifications, including guard towers and barricades. If this spot is attacked again, we should be able to repel it. It might seem strange that a sergeant such as myself should be calling the shots. There are, in fact, no officers present, and because of my noble status, the other sergeants have been deferring to me for orders. Perhaps this is a sign that advancement is in my future. I have not spared much thought on this, however. I just want to rejoin the fight and destroy my enemies. Day 34. We are starving, and we are bored. The battle rages on elsewhere, as the constant sound of gunfire and explosions can be heard from every direction. Vehicles have stopped arriving for refueling, and it has been some time since we have heard from anyone regarding the campaign. I have kept my men busy by having them clear the surrounding buildings, and building sniper and machine gun nests on the upper floors. We have never been more fortified, yet I feel like we are no longer a part of this war. The men are satisfied with the work so far, but I will only be able to maintain authority over them for so long if we do not receive food and water. Day 35. Salvation. Colonel Armoza and Commissar Duras arrived at the head of a convoy of war machines, all in need of fuel. The pair took command of our base and reorganized us. Apparently, there are several fragments of regiments within the city limits, but contact outside of the city has been lost. We are to support this armored column and attempt to breach the enemy lines along the city limits. I have received a field promotion to lieutenant and have been given command of 2 platoons. When I next write, I intend to be outside of the city. Day 38. Much has transpired. As the buildings shrank to 1 or 2 stories and Western Test Fort dissolved into a slum, the enemy is greatly entrenched. We hit them head on and hard, and were cut to pieces by massed heavy bolter fire, many aimed autoguns, hundreds of mortars, and scattered suicide bombers. From my position on the ground, there was an elevated highway that ran the length of the western city limits, which was entirely occupied above and below. Armoza's armored column hammered on the overpass's supports and was able to make sections of the highway come crashing down on the fortifications below them, but it was just not good enough. My platoon was wiped out as we navigated the narrow streets and alleyways, cutting our way through buildings to maintain our formation. Every time we were exposed, heavy bolter fire rained down on us from unknown origins. I voiced to the few survivors that the aim of these heavy bolter teams was far better than would be expected from the Colts. I found myself continually falling back with the remnants of a platoon across increasingly leveled buildings. Near the end of the day, there were no longer any buildings standing on our path to the overpass, and we climbed over wreckage, falling to gunfire and artillery fire one by one. At night, we kept the engagement going, taking hold of ruined city blocks and taking cover to the best of our ability. Our tanks were out of ammunition and were used to clear paths. We spent the whole night taking pot shots at one another as the colonel reorganized our lines. At dawn, our attack was renewed, and the few shells that our vehicles held were fired to cover our advance. We made it very close to the ramshackle formations, only to encounter enemy infantry equipped in Cadian armor, wearing spikes and bloody trophies, commanded by heretic Astartes themselves. Some carried bolt guns, others heavy weapons, and others still plasma pistols. The infantry were clearly veterans, traitor guardsmen from off-world. These were the ones keeping us in the city. The Colts were mostly killed by now, and our enemy's casualties were nearly entirely local cultists. When forced to fall back, I could not help but to think that we were lured to this place, and the trap snapped shut. We fell back as far as Monument Square, and as we reorganized, discovered that nearly all of our infantry we took from this place was gone. The remainder all too readily rejoined the defenders in the makeshift fortifications. I heard an exhausted soldier sarcastically state, "At least our ration situation is sorted." Before I could step in, Colonel Armoza stood atop his signature Lehman Russ, empty of ammunition as it was, alongside Commissar Dras, and delivered an inspiring speech. His words lifted our spirits, and our outright defeat did not seem as bad as it was. We dusted ourselves off and rearmed. Under orders, I organized several scout groups and had them test the Western Front up and down. He has not said as much, but I feel that Colonel Armoza suspects that the whole city is surrounded by one long fortress. For now, the men wait nervously for a counterattack that is evidently not coming. I am walking the rounds, meeting with every soldier, talking with them, making sure they are up to the task. Now more than ever, leadership needs to be visible to maintain morale, and I'm willing to do my part. Day 40. Most of our scout teams have reported back. All of them got close enough to get a good look at the enemy's size and disposition. I was there as Colonel Armoza received these reports, and I could read his facial expression. Most of these scouts got close enough to be gunned down. The enemy allowed them to get close and report back. The enemy wants us to know how hopeless our situation is. Indeed, every scout team reported that the enemy fortification line runs the length of the city limits. As if that were not bad enough, soldiers have been stumbling into our base from the east, and their reports confirm that the city is encircled by the enemy. The sound of continued gunfire is still audible, though I would note the lack of Earthshaker shell impacts. I fear I am losing my decorum. Having reread these recent entries, my tone has been less than eloquent. Indeed, I do not feel eloquent. Maybe it is because I have been spending most of my time with uneducated, unintelligent grunts. Or maybe I am suffering from mental stress because of our situation. Likely, it is both. The Colonel is speaking. I must attend. Day 40 Supplemental. We have a plan. Similar scout teams have been dispatched, only these ones are to search the city in a grid pattern. I personally am being tasked with much of this planning. The idea is to make contact with other Currl units trapped within the city. Colonel Armoza wants to unite our forces, initiate a distraction, and strike at the point of the southern city limits. This is our best chance to break through enemy lines and reunite with the rest of the regimentum. In the meantime, we are sending scavengers through the city to locate weapons, ammunition, supplies such as food and medicine. We are putting everything we have into this upcoming engagement. It could be a while before we are strong enough to attack. Day 48. We march. After a particularly rousing speech by Colonel Armoza, Commissar Dras at his side, we have fallen in and assembled. I cannot even begin to account for how many Currl regiments are represented now. We are now 5 regiments strong, and we have enough firepower and artillery to punch our way through the enemy's lines. First, 3 battalions are to advance west and make like they are preparing to attack, such as lay down a preliminary bombardment, scout ahead, form up platoons, etc. They are to do this for as long as they can keep up the ruse, to draw soldiers from the southern lines to the western city limits. In the meantime, we strike the fortifications to the south and finally exit this death trap of a city. We are beginning maneuvers. I shall stow this book and will not write in it again until we have tasted victory. Day 56, though that day may not be accurate. I must make an account of what happened while I still have the time, and while it is still relatively fresh in my mind. We moved south, tens of thousands of troops strong. We were entirely an infantry formation, with mortars as artillery. We reached the south and realized that our distraction did not work. We had a good view of the enemy formation. Many makeshift bunkers were strung along the city's southern periphery. It was a dark gray line going from the far left to the far right. Behind that, we could make out tanks, black as night Lehman Russ battle tanks. Behind that, infantry formations that likely contained many heavy weapon teams. While we could not see them, we knew that the heretic Astartes were there. They were no fools, and had deduced our strategy through some form of witchcraft. That was the prevailing theory, anyway. We had no choice but to attack, and to inspire this strike, Colonel Armoza led from the front. Commissar Draz was closer to the rear of the formation, primed to kill any who would flee. These two heroes drove us forward. From the center of our column, I had a good view of the enemy defenses that were downhill from our vantage point. As the first several ranks of our army climbed down the vast expanse of ruined buildings, heavy bolters erupted in a deadly crossfire. Wyvern mortar batteries then blasted our platoons apart. Our mortars were not yet close enough to return fire, and we had to pick up the pace in order to gain ground despite punishing gunfire from the enemy formations. By the time our mortar teams were able to set themselves up, their Lehman Russes blasted us with battle cannons and heavy bolter salvos. Anti-aircraft guns atop the ramshackle fortifications were turned on our infantry. This was a daytime assault, and because of this, we could clearly see the Chaos Space Marines as they came into view. What we did not expect was to encounter as many Chaos Space Marines as we had. They went from being leaders of the Traitor Guardsmen to becoming combatants, coming together to repel our attack. I can still remember seeing 8 suits of black power armor, their gold accents gleaming in the noontime sun, each armed with bolt guns. They targeted us independently and fired carefully, one bolt at a time. They were aiming for our Voxcasters, our Flamers, our grenade launchers, and our sergeants. Despite losing half our men, we pressed forward and put as much pressure as we could on their lines. Our mortars forced their heavy weapon teams backward, and eventually caved the ceilings in on their bunkers. The Lehman Russes had expended their ammunition, and we saw evidence of their formation's weakness. They were unable to reload their tanks. The Russes backed off as our crack grenade launchers got close enough to threaten them. It seemed that our fortune had turned for the better. But while the Traitor Guardsmen were in retreat, more and more Chaos Space Marines appeared. Atop a large pile of rubble that was once a bastion, 5 Marines with missile launchers hit us with salvo after salvo of frag missiles. More groups, roughly consisting of 5 Marines, were gathered together and were acting as a unit. We poured our lasguns into them and did absolutely no harm. The aimed fire of the heretic Astartes left many of our leaders dead, and none knew where Colonel Armoza could be found. I took command of the soldiers where I could, ordered them to keep firing, to move forward. I discovered after a time that I was the only one left on my side of the battlefield, and that officers were few and far between. I took in our situation. Our advance was at a standstill, and our men were being cut down with alarming efficiency. There were so many Chaos Space Marines firing on us, I could not keep count. At this point, about a dozen Marines wearing jump packs launched into the air from behind the rubble and crashed down on the ruins over which we fought. They raised their chainswords and commenced a charge. I made a judgment call and ordered my men to retreat. We clambered over the ruins as we fled uphill, noting that the Chaos Space Marines were not targeting those who fled the battle. I could see Commissar Draz attempting to inspire the soldiers around him with a rousing speech about the Emperor. He readied his bolt pistol and fired on a mass of retreating soldiers, firing several shots before they reached him and ran him through with their bayonets. It was not until this moment that I realized that our soldiers were doing everything they could to flee, killing soldiers who were trying to stand their ground, looting corpses for their canteens and backpacks. I tried to organize our retreat, but the men would not listen to me. Soon enough, all of us, several thousand survivors, were not retreating, but were running away in terror. When we had finally left the battlefield, I did what I could to gather together what soldiers I was able to, with several sergeants assisting me. Many fled into the city and were out of reach, but most of our survivors came together. With no officers to outrank me, I brought these weary men and women to the only secure location I knew of, Monument Square. The square itself was walled and possessed of many makeshift guard towers and bunkers. Many sniper nests and machine gun nests lined the buildings that surrounded the clearing. We even had a little bit of fuel left for vehicles, although we did not have any. I spent hours getting everyone settled back into the fortifications, ensuring that we covered every hole. If the forces of chaos wanted us, they were going to have to fight us for it. I do not know how many days have passed since then. I have been very active, moving around the area, checking on our soldiers. Everyone is shaken, and many do not feel that we can win this fight. I have run out of comforting words. Yes, I tell them, we will probably die here. Better here than out there, alone. I was fascinated with how well these words worked. I am a pious person, like any loyal soldier of the Imperium. I have not written praise to the Emperor in this diary, but that does not mean that I do not pray. Recent events have shaken my faith, however, and some of our men seem to have outright lost faith in everything. I am starting to long for the end. Just attack already. How much longer are we going to have to wait? In any case, I feel as though I have fully documented our defeat. I do not know why I continue to write in this journal. It will be discovered by a heretic, if it is recovered at all. Writing here does seem to help me organize my thoughts, however, and I will likely continue to do so until I meet my end. Day 58, I think. One of our snipers on the upper floors of a building opened fire on random troops below. I was nearby, and I ordered men to open fire on his position. Unfortunately, the sniper nests were reinforced, and gunfire was useless. I took a group of soldiers, and we ascended the building. As we climbed the many stairs, it occurred to me that I was not intending to lead them. I simply went inside the building because, well, I was afraid of being shot by a sniper. By the time we got there, he was dead by his own hand. He held a journal which started out similar to mine, but the past 20 or so pages were scribbled nonsense and the ravings of someone who had begun to resent the Emperor. I set the book on fire with my las pistol, and toss the body out the window. The soldiers have all but stopped responding to orders, and are only manning the fortifications because it's safer than being outside of them. I added captain's markings to my environment suit, and took the liberty of promoting our sergeants to lieutenants. I gave them the authority to give their sergeant stripes to soldiers they know who might deserve it. Ultimately, the soldiers promoted to sergeant happened to be the most physically imposing. I suppose this is what it takes to maintain order in Monument Square. Day 60. 2 months. It only took 2 months, and our soldiers in test fort have abandoned their decorum. They respond to orders only when under physical threat. They have stopped observing prayer. They are without hope. Gunfire can still be heard throughout the city, but it's sporadic, and eerie stretches of silence haunt Monument Square. Some of the sergeants have taken men out for what they called rescue missions, to find some of the many people who vanished after our last major battle. Some have returned already, and have taken fellow guardsmen prisoner. I wanted to speak up about this, to reprimand these sergeants. What I ended up doing was giving one of the sergeants lieutenant stripes and telling him to carry on. The sergeants are the only ones keeping the rank-and-file soldiers in line, and I like that they can do this without my needing to do it myself. Day 65. Yes, 65. That's what I'm settling on. Finally, Monument Square had come under attack. It began at night. Many of us heard the sound of Space Marine jump packs near our perimeter. I passed by our fortifications, asking them to be ready for a fight. Behind the masks of their environment suits, I could tell that they were terrified. Soon enough, bolt gun fire rang out as Chaos Space Marines fired from the shadows, each letting off one aim shot at a time. Our sentries started going down, and the rest of the defenders panicked. Mass lasgun fire and the report of several heavy bolters blasted away at the darkness, likely hitting nothing. Some Marines approached close enough to the floodlights for us to see. They attacked at close range with bolters, flamers, and frag grenades. The gold trim of their black armor gleamed brightly as they cut men down. It got to the point that the infantry left to us on that side of the battlefield were all behind fortifications and were mostly cowering behind stone walls. They would be dealt with soon. Without warning, 6 bulky Chaos Space Marines teleported into the battlefield, between the fortifications and the edge of the darkness beyond our lines. They wore black and gold, had trophy racks on their backs, and long tusks from their helmets. Each had a bulky hand that I assumed was a power fist, while their other hand held something of a fusion of flamer and bolt gun. Surprisingly, our men rose from hiding and fired out of their fire points. Sniper and heavy bolter nests erupted as well, targeting the 6 behemoths. They ignored all of this and shrugged it all off as they advanced toward the bunkers. Once they were in range, they lined up, 1 Marine per bunker, and with their flamers, burned the inhabitants alive. When this was done, they moved up to the bunkers and used their power fists to destroy them, turning them into rubble. They climbed on top of this and fired their bolt guns into our rear lines in the center of Monument Square, which held our support teams, supply crates, medical, and large fuel containers. Our support personnel let them have it, and our gun nests in the buildings continued to pour fire down on the behemoths. And for the first time, the behemoths came into range of all of our nests, and certain locations had not yet seen the enemy, and so had plenty of ammunition. However, when it first seemed that the behemoths were being injured by our fire, they teleported away, and all of our efforts to stop them bore no fruit and only served to further waste our supplies. In the meantime, Chaos Space Marines with bolt pistols and chain swords had been advancing on a different portion of our bunkers. They climbed and leaped over the fortifications, killed the men inside, and it seemed that they were trying to take 1 or 2 captives each, who screamed for death as the Marines sprinted into the darkness. It was clear that these enemies were beyond our ability to fight. Then, dawn came. We learned what the Jump Pack Marines were doing. As dawn illuminated the city, we could see that the chains had been set up between various buildings anchored to the roofs. They had waited until dawn before they attached still living soldiers to smaller chains and strung them along the larger ones. Imagine a street with buildings on either side. At the roofs, chains hung between the buildings, dipping slightly over the street. Smaller chains hung from these, and at the end, living soldiers were hooked and hung, bleeding and screaming. The Jump Pack Marines strung the guardsmen up by leaping up into the air and spearing each soldier on a hook at the height of their jump. The last soldier to be strung up was none other than Colonel Armoza, strung close to our fortifications. The Marines withdrew, and we were left with the massed dead below and the dying soldiers above. While all of the hanging men pleaded for death, none screamed louder and more pathetically than the colonel. He begged and pleaded to be let down, then cried for us to kill him. Part of me wanted to put these captives out of their misery, but I was also transfixed by their terrible scene. I realized then that courage is a mask we don, and when we are laid bare, we are pathetic creatures that suffer in our own brief lives before we die and fall into oblivion. I knew then that there was no emperor, at least no god that looked out for us. Our lives were pointless, and nothing we did mattered. The hanging men died over the period of the day, with Colonel Armoza lasting the longest, bleeding, pissing, and crying as life left him. Corpses now decorated Monument Square. Finally, I understood things, and I needed the Chaos Space Marines to understand. I walked out alone, though I stopped while our fortification network was still within sight. I screamed at the top of my lungs. We get it. We understand now. The Emperor is false. We are worms with pointless lives. Nothing we do matters. When we die, there is no point. The galaxy is cold, and nothing matters. I don't know what I expected, but after what felt like a few minutes, one Chaos Space Marine stepped out from the pile of rubble and approached me casually. He wore the same black and gold as the rest of the army, and his back supported a crowded trophy rack. His chainsword was rested against his shoulder, and his other hand held something that I could not see. I was fearful, but I stood my ground, certain that I would be run through should I try to flee. When the Marine stood before me, I had to look up to make eye contact with his helmet. He held out his hand, and his fingers opened to reveal Colonel Armoza's rank insignia. I was being offered his rank, and all that came with it. I took the insignia, undid my own, and replaced it with the colonel's. I noticed at this point that 3 other Marines had stepped out from the rubble and were watching. I assumed that this was all that was required of me, and I took my leave. When I turned to face our fortifications and began to walk back, several dozen of the men were standing in the street, observing what had transpired. I came to stand before them, and they witnessed my new rank of colonel. I stood before them and observed their expressions behind their environment suits, looking lost and pathetic. I removed my helmet and stared them down. Slowly, one by one, the others removed their helmets. They looked apprehensive and sorrowful. When we finally stood there, all of our environment suits unsealed, I barked at them. "Back to your positions." Afraid of me, they scattered, and they spread this attitude to the rest of the men. We are now nothing. The men belong to their sergeants, and are kept fearful through their strength. The sergeants fear the lieutenants, each of whom has committed terrible atrocities by now, and the lieutenants have me to answer to. This morning I made it a point to kill 2 of them. I'm considering tossing their insignia into the street and announcing that anyone who can claim it and pin it to themselves can have it. The more I think of it, the more I anticipate the bloodshed as rank-and-file soldiers battle one another for it. I like the idea, now that I've written it down. I think I'll do that now. Forget the day. We belong to the Black Legion. We are not ourselves Black Legion. We are nothing. We have no name, regimentum, or honor. We are cowards who have finally figured out why life is meaningless. We have been freed from imperial tyranny, and know now that we can do anything we want, satisfy ourselves, and make ourselves happy. We answer only to strength, and our leaders have become leaders by showing their strength and proving their superiority over their lesser followers. As for the Chaos Gods, sure, they exist all right. They exist because they must exist. War, pestilence, desire, knowledge, all are part of what binds together this cold galaxy that, if it cared at all, it would hate us. Yes, I pray to them. I pray to all of them, lest the ones left out become angry with me. I pray to them because the darkness is all that exists. Praying to the Emperor is like praying to a skeleton. Why did it take me so long to understand that? Myself and my soldiers have been combined with the other remnants of the Currl regimentum. The city of Testfort was only one battlefield on a large rebellious world, and the trap our men were led into was one of many. The same thing happened to many of our regiments, but I was one of the few to emerge with a superior rank. It was not a trap, as it turns out. It was more like a spinning clay pot platform, and the fingers that worked us, the Chaos Space Marines, shaved off what they needed in order to mold us into the renegade soldiers we are today. And yes, we are renegades. We are traitors. These insults I used to use are now a badge of honor for me. Yes, call me a traitor if that makes you feel any better about yourself. I will be the one cutting you in half with my power sword. You will die knowing that I am stronger than you, and that you are pathetic and weak. I said I would reserve these last few pages for when I was victorious, and now I am. Soon, I will address millions of our Currl soldiers, who now have no name besides traitor, and I will threaten their lives. I will remind them that to rape and pillage is our way now, and that together we will ravage any world we descend upon. Well, for now, I have been advised that Lord Relzar wishes to speak with me. If he does not kill me, then I will speak with my men. And so I close this journal for good. Blessed are the Chaos Gods. May they light this pathetic galaxy ablaze.